See, Dad? A $150,000 upgrade, and we haven't even poured the concrete, my son Daniel declared, his voice echoing across the churned mud that was once my backyard. He stood with the contractor, a beefy man in a fluorescent vest, in the place Maria's prize-winning roses had bloomed for 50 years. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and damp, wounded earth. The space was no longer a garden. It was a construction site, a fresh grave for a lifetime of memories. It was Friday evening, 6 p.m., and my world had been bulldozed. Daniel's wife, Sarah, let out a sharp, brittle laugh from the patio. It looks so much bigger now, so much more potential. The contractor grunted in agreement, his eyes scanning the devastation with professional satisfaction. It was final. The torn roots, the splintered trellises, the deep gouges from the machinery, they all screamed a language of absolute and irreversible loss. My son looked at me, his smile wide and expectant, waiting for my approval of the desecration. He saw a clean slate. I saw a crime scene. The contractor unrolled a set of blueprints across the hood of his truck, the white paper stark against the encroaching dusk. Pool here, cabana there, fire pit in the corner. We start the plumbing Monday morning. He pointed a thick finger at a box on the plans. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, watched from her kitchen window, her hand over her mouth in horror. Daniel just patted the blueprint. The value of this place just shot up, Dad. It's a smart investment. He was showing me the invoice for my own execution. I remained silent. My hands, clasped behind my back, were steady. I looked at the muddy earth, at the ghost of my wife's garden, and then I looked at my son's triumphant face. I offered him a small, placid smile. There was no tremor in my lips, no heat in my eyes. The calmness seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He couldn't know that my grief was already hardening into something else, something cold and patient and meticulously constructed, much like the garden he had just destroyed. Daniel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Well, say something. The air crackled with tension. The contractor shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. Mrs. Gable was still at her window, a silent, horrified witness. This was the moment for rage, for tears, for the broken cry of a defeated old man. They were all waiting for it. I took a slow, deliberate breath, ready to give them their show. But 2 months earlier, it had all begun with a pen, a stack of papers, and a lie dressed up as love. 2 months earlier, the air smelled of honeysuckle and damp soil, a perfume Maria had cultivated for decades. I was on my knees, hands deep in the earth, tending to the very roses Daniel would later uproot. Each blossom was a memory, each thorn a trial we had weathered together. The garden was a living chronicle of our 50-year marriage. In this sanctuary, I could still feel her beside me, her quiet presence a warm comfort against the silence of the house. It was the only part of my life that still felt whole. Then Daniel's sleek silver sedan crunched up the gravel driveway, a sterile intrusion into my organic world. He and Sarah stepped out, dressed in crisp, expensive clothes that seemed to repel the very pollen in the air. Dad, you're still playing in the dirt? Daniel said, not as a question, but as a judgment. Sarah eyed a rambling wisteria vine with distaste. This must be so much work for you, Xavier. All this upkeep. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Daniel brushed past a sprawling rose bush, and a thorn snagged the sleeve of his cashmere sweater. He recoiled, pulling the thread loose with a curse. See, this place is a jungle, Dad. It's a liability. His anger was so sharp, so immediate. I remembered a summer afternoon, decades ago, in this very spot. Maria was showing a 5-year-old Daniel the difference between a weed and a flower, his small hands carefully cradling a ladybug. The contrast between that memory and the man before me was a physical ache in my chest. Inside, over coffee I had brewed and they barely touched, the real conversation began. We've been thinking about the future, Daniel started, his tone carefully modulated. Taxes, inheritance, probate court. It can get messy. We want to protect you. Protect the house. He slid a folder across the polished oak table. We think it's best if you sign the deed over to us now. Just a formality, to make things easier down the line. It was a threat wrapped in a language of concern. a velvet glove on an iron fist. While Daniel explained the benefits, Sarah wandered around the living room, her fingers tracing the dust on the bookshelves. She picked up a heavy, leather-bound volume. "What's this dusty old thing?" she asked, her nose wrinkling slightly. I felt a familiar pang of defensiveness. "That was Maria's," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Her gardening journal. She kept notes on every seed she ever planted here. It held decades of handwritten observations, soil pH readings, and sketches of planting layouts." Daniel glanced over, his focus barely shifting from the legal documents. "Sentimental junk. You should throw that out, Dad. Mom's been gone 5 years. No point in letting this old stuff pile up." He waved a dismissive hand at the journal, at the room, at the entire life Maria and I had built. To him, it wasn't a legacy. It was clutter, a problem to be managed and eventually cleared away. That was the moment I understood. He saw not just the journal, but me as something irrelevant to be discarded. I took the journal from Sarah and placed it back on the shelf, the worn leather cool against my skin. The betrayal was a small, cold stone in my stomach. They saw history as a burden and memory as dust. The conversation moved on, back to capital gains and property tax, but I could no longer focus. I was staring at the journal, thinking of Maria's elegant script filling its pages. And the chasm between my world and my son's felt impossibly vast. The house fell silent, save for the rustling of his legal papers. The pressure campaign began the next day. A call from Daniel in the morning. "Had we had a chance to look over the paperwork, Dad?" An email from Sarah in the afternoon, with an article about the dangers of senior financial mismanagement. They created a ticking clock that only they could hear, a sense of manufactured urgency designed to overwhelm my defenses. Each call was a little more insistent, each message a little more pointed. My home, my sanctuary, was beginning to feel like a cage. A week later, I got a call from a man named Mr. Klein, a lawyer Daniel had retained on my behalf. His voice was smooth and condescending. He used terms like quitclaim deed, an expedited transfer, and fiduciary responsibility. He made it sound like I was being irresponsible by even hesitating. "It's standard procedure for estate planning at your age, Mr. Dubois. The cleanest way to handle the asset." An asset. That's all it was. Not a home, not a life. Just an asset on a balance sheet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the garden in the moonlight, the scent of night-blooming jasmine thick in the air. I stopped by the old oak where Maria and I had carved our initials inside a lopsided heart 50 years ago. She had always said, "This garden is our story, Xavier. Every plant is a chapter." Now, looking at Daniel's legal papers on the kitchen table, I felt like he was asking me to tear out the pages and burn the book. The betrayal was no longer a stone, it was a blade. The day of the signing felt like a funeral. A mobile notary, a cheerful young woman who was oblivious to the drama, set up her briefcase on my dining table. Daniel and Sarah stood behind me, their hands on my shoulders, a grotesque parody of a loving family. The air was cold and still, a stark contrast to the warm sun streaming through the windows. Every rustle of paper, every click of the notary's pen sounded like a hammer blow, nailing a coffin shut. I signed where the notary pointed, my signature a spidery, unfamiliar thing. As I lifted the pen, Daniel patted my back with false heartiness. "Good man, you're doing the smart thing. Now we can finally bring this house into the 21st century." The condescension was suffocating, a thick blanket of disrespect. The notary stamped the document with a loud, final thud. In the eyes of the law, and in front of this official witness, I had just given away my entire world. I had been publicly disarmed. After they left, a profound emptiness settled over the house. I picked up my copy of the deed transfer, my hands trembling slightly. My eyes scanned the dense legal text until they found it. Addendum B. A long, technical paragraph I had insisted our lawyer add when we first bought the house. An addendum based on my work as a botanist. Daniel and his slick lawyer had clearly seen it as archaic boilerplate, a botanist's folly not worth their time. They hadn't read the fine print, but they had signed it. A flicker of false hope ignited within me. I called my old lawyer, Bill, but his secretary informed me he'd retired 2 years ago. I was put through to a junior associate, a young man with a brisk, impatient tone. I tried to explain my concerns about the addendum. He cut me off. Sir, a quitclaim deed is ironclad. You transfer the property, free and clear. The ancillary clauses are likely unenforceable without a separate filing. The hope was extinguished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me in even deeper darkness. 2 weeks later, Daniel called with an unnervingly cheerful suggestion. Dad, my old friend has a cabin up by the lake. It's empty this weekend. Why don't you go? Get out of the house. Get some fresh air. You deserve a break. His insistence felt strange, a little too enthusiastic. But I was tired of fighting, tired of the tension in my own home. So I agreed. I packed a small bag, locked the door behind me, and drove away, trusting my son to watch over my house, my home. And he turned on Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. The moment I turned onto my street, something felt wrong. A strange, acrid smell hung in the air, overpowering the usual scent of cut grass and blooming flowers. It was the smell of diesel fuel and raw, upturned earth. The same smell that hangs over a fresh grave. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in my gut. I pulled into the driveway and saw the deep, muddy tracks scarring the lawn. My legs felt like lead as I walked around the side of the house. The sight that met me stole the breath from my lungs. It was a wasteland, a battlefield after the battle. Maria's garden was gone. The ancient wisteria, the vibrant azaleas, the delicate Japanese maples, all of it had been scraped from the earth. In the center of the muddy devastation, a series of wooden stakes and bright orange string outlined a massive rectangle. My sanctuary had been surgically, brutally erased. Daniel was there, talking to a man who was packing up a small bulldozer. He turned as I approached, a huge, triumphant grin spreading across his face. Dad, you're back early. Surprise. What do you think? Phase 1 of the upgrade is complete. We're putting in a beautiful in-ground pool, heated saltwater. The works. He spread his arms wide, presenting the carnage as if it were a gift. He was the conquering hero, and this was his victory. I couldn't speak. My eyes were fixed on a splintered, mangled stump near the patio. It was all that was left of Maria's 70-year-old climbing rose, the one that had been here when we bought the house. I could so clearly see a memory of 5-year-old Daniel, his face serious with concentration, as I taught him how to gently prune its suckers so the main plant could thrive. You loved this rose, I whispered, my voice hoarse. It was the only thing I could think to say. Daniel actually laughed. A short, dismissive bark. Oh, come on, Dad. It was a weed. It was tearing up the foundation. We're improving the property value. Nobody cares about a bunch of old roses. He put his arm around my shoulder, his grip feeling more like a vice. This is better for everyone. A new chapter. The justification delivered with such casual cruelty was more devastating than the bulldozer itself. He hadn't just destroyed a garden. He had erased a history he refused to value. That night, the house felt alien. The familiar scent of roses and damp earth was gone, replaced by the sterile smell of mud and diesel fumes seeping through the closed windows. I sat in the living room, in the dark, staring at the empty bookshelf where Maria's journal usually sat. I had packed it for my trip to the lake, a small act of self-preservation I hadn't even consciously understood at the time. The book was my only tangible connection left to the world that had been ripped away from me. The next morning, I was outside at dawn, walking the perimeter of the destruction. That's when I overheard Sarah on the phone, her voice carrying clearly from the open kitchen window. She was laughing. Oh, you should have seen his face, Lisa. Complete shock. Honestly, it was just a bunch of dirty old flowers. Daniel finally put his foot down. We're going to get at least a $1.2 million appraisal once the pool and cabana are in. Her words were like acid, dissolving any last shred of doubt about their intentions. The sheer, calculated nature of it all hit me. The fake trip to the lake, the timing, the complete disregard for anything but money. I walked back inside, my mind numb. I sat at the kitchen table and opened Maria's journal. Her beautiful, looping cursive filled the page. A sketch of a rose trellis, notes on soil acidity, a pressed Queen Anne's lace from a long-ago picnic. The journal felt impossibly heavy in my hands, a testament to a love and a life my son was actively trying to bury under concrete. I was at my lowest point. The legal avenues seemed closed, my son and his wife were openly mocking me, and my wife's life's work was a muddy pit. The house, stripped of its soul, was now just a shell, a waiting room for my own obsolescence. The ticking clock was no longer a vague threat. It was the concrete pour, scheduled for Monday morning, less than 48 hours away. That pour felt like the final shovelful of dirt on my own coffin. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on me. My hand idly traced the embossed cover of Maria's journal. I had read it cover to cover a dozen times since she passed, but now I opened it with a different purpose. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for a weapon. I started at the beginning, January 1974, the year we moved in. I read through her meticulous notes on planting schedules, weather patterns, and soil amendments. It was a diary of the earth, a slow, patient conversation with the land itself, a story of devotion. As I flipped through the brittle pages, the folded piece of paper tucked into the back sleeve fell out. It was a faded carbon copy of a letter, dated March 12, 1974. My own handwriting. It was a letter I had sent to our original attorney, the one who drafted the deed. I was clarifying my intentions for a specific clause I had insisted on including, based on my work as a botanist cataloging rare plant species. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. The letter detailed my reasoning for Addendum B, the conservation easement. I had identified 3 rare, native orchid species and a specific strain of heritage rose on the property that were unique to our microclimate. I argued that the garden wasn't just decorative, it was a unique, biodiverse sanctuary. The letter was my original intent, my scientific justification. Maria had saved it, tucked away in her journal, a quiet testament to the partnership we shared in all things. I immediately went to the safe in my study and pulled out my copy of the deed. My hands shook as I read Addendum B again, this time with the letter as my guide. The language was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. The easement legally protected the designated biodiverse garden area, the exact footprint of what was now a mud pit, from any significant alteration without the written, notarized consent of the original grantor. Of me, a consent I had most certainly not given. And then I saw it, the final, beautiful, frugal sentence of the addendum, the part Daniel's slick city lawyer had dismissed as archaic nonsense. Any violation of this conservation easement, verified by a qualified botanist or ecologist, will trigger an immediate reversion clause, voiding the transfer of title and returning the property in full to the grantor or his estate. It wasn't just a penalty. It was a kill switch, a landmine I had planted 50 years ago and completely forgotten about. The despair vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The grief was still there, a hard knot in my chest, but it now had a purpose. It was fuel. I spent the rest of Saturday on the phone, my voice calm and firm. I found a semi-retired real estate litigator, a bulldog named Peterson, who specialized in obscure contract law. I found a professor of botany at the local university, Dr. Anya Sharma, who was an expert in native plant preservation. I had to pay a steep emergency consultation fee, using the last of my savings. It was a gamble, but it was the only move I had left. I emailed them scanned copies of the deed, Addendum B, my old letter, and photos of the devastation from that morning. Peterson called back within the hour. "Mr. Dubois," he said, and I could hear the predatory grin in his voice. "This is the most beautiful legal instrument I have ever seen. It's a work of art." Sunday morning, while Daniel and Sarah were out for brunch, discussing tile options for their new pool, Dr. Sharma arrived at my house. She was a woman in her late 40s with kind, intelligent eyes. She walked the perimeter of the mud pit, taking soil samples and photographs. She examined the shredded root balls and splintered stumps. Her expression grew more and more grim. "They used a backhoe," she said softly. "There's no care here." This was eradication. She stood where Maria's heritage rose had been, her fingers gently touching the mangled wood. The Rosa gallica officinalis, a true apothecary rose. There are only a few documented examples of this specific cultivar this old in the entire state. The orchid species you mentioned, they would have been dormant, but their rhizomes would be in the topsoil layer, which is now completely compacted or removed. This is a significant ecological loss, Mr. Dubois, unquestionably. By Sunday afternoon, I had Dr. Sharma's signed and notarized affidavit in my email inbox. It was a precise, scientific, and damning assessment. It formally verified that the terms of the conservation easement had not just been violated, but obliterated with extreme prejudice. The document was my sword. Peterson had already drafted the notice of reversion and filed for an emergency injunction to halt the construction. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the final insult. It came late Sunday evening. Daniel strode into the living room, holding a tablet. "Okay, Dad. Sarah and I picked out the tile. It's a nice Italian porcelain, very tasteful. We're going to have to ask you to chip in for the upgrade, though. It's about $12,500 over budget. Since you'll be using the pool too, it's only fair." He wasn't asking. He was informing me. He was billing me for the destruction of my own life, for the nails in my wife's coffin. He saw Maria's journal on the end table beside me. He picked it up, flipping through the pages with a bored expression. "You're still looking at this thing? You got to let go of the past, Dad. It's not healthy." He tossed the journal back on the table, a careless, dismissive gesture that made my blood run cold. He had no idea he was tossing away his inheritance, his future, his $1.2 million prize. He was completely unaware that the trap was about to spring. I simply nodded. "You're right, Daniel. It's time to move on." My calmness seemed to please him. He saw it as acceptance, as the final surrender of a tired old man. "Great," he said, slapping me on the shoulder. "The concrete trucks arrive at 7 a.m. sharp. It's the dawn of a new era for this place." He left the room, whistling, already picturing his perfect, sterile, soulless backyard. A backyard he believed, with every fiber of his being, was his. I waited until I heard the door to his bedroom close. Then I made the call to Peterson. "He's confirmed the concrete pour for 7 a.m. tomorrow." Peterson's voice was grimly satisfied. "Perfect. The process server will be there at 6:45 a.m. with the injunction and the notice of reversion. He'll serve your son, the contractor, and he'll post a copy on the front door. By 7:01, that property will legally be yours again, free and queer." The mechanism was now in motion. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, Maria's journal in my lap, and I waited for the dawn. I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet alignment of past and present. The garden was gone, but its spirit, its legal ghost, was about to rise from the mud and reclaim what had been stolen. Maria had always been the patient one, the one who understood that some things take seasons to grow. She had taught me well. At 6:30 a.m., I was sitting on the front porch, a cup of coffee in my hands. The air was cool and damp. The first birds were beginning to sing. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was a stark contrast to the storm that was about to break over this house. I was the calm at the center of the hurricane, a silent observer, waiting for the inevitable collision of arrogance and consequence. The smell of upturned earth was still there, a reminder of the crime. At 6:45 a.m., just as Peterson had promised, a nondescript sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in the suit got out, carrying a thick, legal envelope. He walked up my driveway with a brisk, purposeful stride. At the same time, the first of the massive concrete trucks rumbled down the street, its engine a low growl that vibrated through the ground. The final act was about to begin, precisely on schedule. Daniel came out the front door, still pulling on his shirt, a wide grin on his face. He saw the concrete truck and gave the driver a thumbs up. Then he saw the process server. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and irritation. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone already hostile. The man in the suit didn't flinch. "Daniel Dubois, I'm here to serve you with a court order." The man handed Daniel the papers. Daniel's eyes scanned the first page, his face shifting from confusion to disbelief to pure, unadulterated rage. "What the hell is this? Reversion clause? Conservation easement? This is insane." He looked up from the papers, his eyes locking on me as I sat calmly on the porch. You did this. That's not even legal. That's some dusty old rule nobody cares about." The process server ignored him, coolly taping a copy of the injunction to the front door. The driver of the concrete truck leaned out his window, looking confused. The contractor's pickup truck pulled up, and the server handed him a copy as well. The contractor read it, his face paling. "I can't pour," he said to Daniel, shaking his head. "This is a stop work order. We touch that ground and my company is liable for triple damages." Daniel crumpled the papers in his fist, his face a mask of fury. He stormed over to the porch, his shadow falling over me. "You can't do this. I own this house. The deed is in my name." I looked up at him from my chair, my expression unreadable. I took a slow sip of my coffee, and then I brought the scene full circle. I was back in the moment where this all started, with him standing over me, in the ruins of my life. "See, Dad, a $150,000 upgrade, and we haven't even poured the concrete," he had declared on Friday. Now on Monday morning, that same boast was an epitaph for his arrogance. His dream of a $1.2 million property was dissolving in the morning mist. He was standing on land that minute by minute was legally ceasing to be his. The public humiliation he had inflicted on me was now being mirrored back at him in front of the very workers he had hired. "The deed is void, Daniel," I said, my voice even and quiet. "You violated the conservation easement. It's all in the papers you're holding." I gestured with my coffee cup toward the leather-bound book on the small table beside me. "You called my wife's journal sentimental junk, but she kept a copy of my letter explaining the easement right there in the back. You see, the garden wasn't just a garden. It was a legal tripwire. And you ran right through it." Sarah burst out of the house, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening? Daniel, why isn't the truck moving?" She saw the papers in his hand and the look on his face, and her own triumphant expression collapsed into fear. "What is that?" she demanded. The contractor was already on the phone, likely with his own lawyer. The concrete truck driver simply shut off his engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension tenfold. "He's kicking us out," Daniel roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's using some crazy ancient clause about weeds to take the house back." His voice cracked on the last word. Mrs. Gable was at her window again, this time with a small, satisfied smile on her face. The public stage he had created for my defeat was now serving as the backdrop for his own spectacular downfall. He had built the arena, and I had simply let him walk into it. "It was never about the weeds, son," I said, rising slowly from my chair. "It was about respect, something you and your wife seem to value only in terms of dollars and cents." I looked past him, at the muddy scar where my wife's roses had bloomed. "Maria knew this garden was the soul of this house. She knew I would protect it. And she kept the proof you would need to understand that. Maria's quiet foresight was my final, loving gift from her." My lawyer, Peterson, arrived then, his timing impeccable. He strode up the driveway, a shark in a pinstripe suit. He didn't even look at me. He addressed Daniel directly. "Mr. Dubois," he said, his voice dripping with authority, "the reversion clause has been legally triggered. As of the filing of this injunction, you are no longer the title holder of this property. You are a guest, and my client would like you and your wife to vacate the premises by 5 o'clock this evening." Sarah let out a small, strangled gasp. "5 o'clock? That's impossible. Our things are here." Daniel's face was a mottled red and white. "We'll sue you. We'll sue him. We'll take this to court for years." Peterson just smiled, a thin, chilling expression. "Please do. The violation is a matter of public record and expert testimony. Every day you remain on this property past the deadline will incur a trespassing fine of $5,000. Payable to my client. Your move. The fight drained out of them, replaced by the hollow shock of absolute defeat. The contractor tipped his hat to me. Sorry for the mess, Mr. Dubois, he mumbled, before getting in his truck and driving away. The concrete truck followed, its departure a slow, lumbering funeral procession for Daniel's ambitions. It was just the four of us now, standing in the driveway amidst the wreckage of their plans. Daniel finally looked at me. His eyes filled not with anger, but with a dawning, horrified understanding. He was seeing me for the first time, not as a frail old man to be managed, but as the person who'd just surgically dismantled his entire life. Why? He whispered, the question hanging in the quiet air. Why not just say no? Because you wouldn't have listened, I said, my voice devoid of malice. It was a simple statement of fact. You needed to learn that some things have a value that can't be measured in dollars or property taxes. You had to learn that the past isn't just junk to be thrown away. I picked up Maria's journal from the table, its weight familiar and comforting in my hand. You dismissed this, and you dismissed me. That was your mistake. They were silent. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They had no legal standing, no leverage, and a rapidly approaching deadline. The home they had schemed for, the asset they had so carefully secured, had vanished like a mirage. All because they had failed to read the fine print and had mistaken love for weakness. Sarah was the first to break. She turned and walked back into the house without another word, the sharp click of the closing door echoing in the driveway. The sound was one of finality, the sound of a chapter ending. Daniel stood frozen for another moment, his crumpled legal papers still clutched in his hand. He looked from my face to the muddy pit in the backyard, then back again. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the little boy I once knew, but one who marveled at ladybugs and asked his father for help. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the bitter resentment of a man who had lost everything. Without another word, he turned and followed his wife into the house. My house. I could hear their muffled, angry voices from inside as they began the process of packing. The sounds of drawers being pulled open, of objects being moved. The sounds of a hasty and bitter retreat. I walked over to the edge of the devastated garden. The soil was scarred and compacted, a testament to the violence it had endured. It would take years to heal, to bring it back to a fraction of its former glory. But it could be healed. The roots, I knew, ran deep. I thought of Maria, and I knew she would have wept to see the destruction. But she also would have understood the necessity of the fight. She had been a gardener, after all. She knew that sometimes, to save a garden, you have to ruthlessly pull out the invasive species that threaten to choke out all the light. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the porch, watching. Movers arrived in the afternoon, a quiet, efficient crew that loaded boxes into a truck. Daniel and Sarah moved like ghosts, their faces pale and drawn, avoiding my eyes. They took their expensive clothes, their electronics, their sterile vision of the future, and they left. By 4:45 p.m., the moving truck was gone. A single car remained in the driveway. Daniel came out of the house one last time, carrying a small box. He stopped and looked at me. "Are you happy now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You have your dirt, and you're all alone." I didn't answer him. I simply looked at him, holding Maria's journal, and let the silence stretch. Let it become an answer in itself. He shook his head, a final, bitter gesture of defeat, and got into his car. I watched him drive away, down the street and out of my life. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the wounded earth of the garden. The house was quiet. It was mine again. I stood up, walked inside, and closed the front door.